Once she's settled somewhere smaller, we can list in the spring. My son wrote that about me, in a group chat named after me, Margaret. A chat I was never supposed to see. The last call from my son lasted 9 seconds. He needed the spare key for a delivery, and he hung up before I could ask when I'd see him. I signed our family home over to my 2 children a year ago. Everyone said it was the smart thing, avoid probate, keep it simple. So I signed. And for a year the phone has only rung when someone needs something a house can give. What none of them knew, because family isn't supposed to need secrets, is that my husband left one account in my name alone. $310,000, and a small piece of land 2 counties over. They redirected my mail so carefully they redirected themselves right past it. I spent 30 years in the county recorder's office. I read deeds and dates for a living. If you've ever been loved only for what you could give, and set aside the moment you gave it, stay with me. I know exactly which line to sign. I want to tell you how I noticed. Because it wasn't one loud moment. There was no shouting, no slammed door. It was quieter than that, and quieter is worse, because you can talk yourself out of quiet for a very long time. I keep a paper calendar on the kitchen wall. Old habit, 30 years of logging what came in and what got recorded, and you don't stop just because you retire. I write down every call from the kids the way I used to write down every filing. Kevin, Tuesday. Lauren, Sunday. Little check marks, the way you'd mark a receipt. One evening in February I stood in front of that calendar with a cup of tea going cold in my hand, and I saw the shape of the last 3 months for the first time. Not the loneliness of it, I'd been feeling that for a while, and feeling is easy to argue with. I saw the pattern of it. Kevin called the week the gutters needed clearing. He called the week his storage unit flooded and he wanted the boxes in my garage. He called the day the delivery needed a signature. Lauren called when she needed the good roasting pan for Easter, and again when her youngest had a school project about family history, and she wanted the old photographs. Every call landed on an errand. Every visit had a task attached to it like a receipt stapled to a form. Take the task away, and there was no call. I stood there and did the thing I'd done my whole working life without thinking about it. I read the record instead of the story I'd been telling myself about the record. And the record said something the story never would. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was a resource with a driveway. Being useful had always felt, to me, like being loved. That night, for the first time, it felt like a category someone had quietly moved me into. Let me back up, because you deserve to know that I did this to myself, at least the first part of it. A year earlier, Kevin sat at my kitchen table with a folder and a pen and a very reasonable voice. Mom, we should get the house into our names now. It's just paperwork. It avoids probate, it keeps things simple. No lawyers picking at each other when the time comes. He said, when the time comes, gently, the way you'd talk about weather. Lauren was on speakerphone agreeing. Brianne, Kevin's wife, had already printed the deed. I had a small feeling in my chest that I talked myself out of. I'd witnessed 1,000 of these transfers from the other side of the counter, and I knew, that the smart version keeps something in the parent's name. A life estate. A retained interest. Something. But those forms are for other people's families, families that need contracts because they don't trust each other. Mine wasn't like that. So I signed a quitclaim deed, plain and total, and I handed my children the house free and clear, and I felt generous doing it. I want you to understand that I felt generous. That's the part that still costs me. The first crack came at Thanksgiving, and like everything else, it was framed as kindness. There were more of us that year, Brianne's parents visiting, the grandchildren loud and wonderful. When I came in from the kitchen with the gravy, my seat at the big table was gone. Kevin had set me a place at the kids' folding table in the next room. So the little ones can spread out. Mom, you don't mind, you're easier to talk to anyway. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. I carried my plate to the folding table and I ate my Thanksgiving dinner listening to my family through a doorway, and I told myself I didn't mind. I minded. But I filed it under kindness, because that's where they told me to file it. After that, the reorganizing picked up speed, and every step of it wore the same face. In December, for your knees, they moved me out of the front bedroom I'd shared with my husband for 30 years and into the small back room that used to be Kevin's. You don't need all that space, Mom, and this way the grandkids have somewhere when they stay over. My bed didn't fit, they got me a smaller one. My husband's dresser went to the garage to make room. Then the mail. Brienne noticed I'd been getting confused by all the statements. I had asked her, once, a single question about a medical bill code, the kind of question anyone asks, and she offered to handle the confusing ones so you don't have to worry. A change of address form appeared. I signed where she pointed. I was still signing where people pointed, I hadn't learned yet. My mail began arriving already opened, sorted into what she decided I needed to see. I found out later how complete it was. A holiday card from an old friend in Ohio never reached me. I assumed she'd forgotten, and felt the small ordinary loneliness of being forgotten by one more person. Months later I learned it had come, and been set aside with a stack of things Brienne judged not important enough to pass along. They hadn't just taken my bills. They'd been quietly deciding which of my friends still got to reach me. Stay with me here, because this is the part one had to walk back later, and it's the part one think a lot of us get wrong. I told myself all of this was love. Cramped bedroom, opened mail, the folding table. I told myself my children were taking care of me. It took me until February, standing at that calendar, to understand that being taken care of and being taken over can look identical from the inside, right up until the moment you notice you no longer decide what reaches you. Because that was the thing that finally turned the key. I realized one afternoon that I couldn't have told you what mail I was supposed to be getting. My own bank statement, my husband's pension notice, the property tax card I used to know by heart. I didn't know if they were coming, because I no longer saw the envelopes they came in. Someone else stood between me and my own paper now. And I had let them, one reasonable form at a time. So I did something. It was small, and my hands were not steady doing it, and it was the first real thing I'd done in a year that they hadn't asked me to do. Kevin came by on a Sunday to drop off his tablet. He wanted me to look through the old scanned photos and pick some for Lauren's family history thing. He set it on the kitchen table, logged in, showed me how to swipe, and then went out to the garage to hunt for a ladder. The photo app was open. But across the top of the screen, a banner slid down and then away, a new message, in a group chat. And the name of the group chat was my name. Just my first name. Margaret. I had never been in a group chat called Margaret. You are not in the chat that is named after you. I understood that the way you understand a cold draft, before you found the open window, you already know there is one. I opened it. I'm not going to pretend I hesitated for long. 30 years of reading other people's records teaches you that the truth is usually already written down somewhere, and the only sin is refusing to look at it. So I looked. The chat went back months. Kevin, Lauren, Brienne. A rotation, that's the first thing I understood, a schedule of who has to check on Mom this week, traded back and forth like a chore nobody wanted. I did last weekend, it's your turn. Can you swing by, she just needs to feel visited. She just needs to feel visited. My son's wife wrote that, and my daughter sent back a thumbs up. There was a running thread about money, not mine, there's the cost of me. Splitting the price of dealing with Mom's stuff. A conversation about whether the back room could be repainted after. After what, they didn't say, but I knew how to read a document for what it doesn't say. And then, 3 weeks back, a message from Kevin that I photographed with my own phone, my hands finally steady because I'd stopped being their mother and started being the clerk again. Once she's settled somewhere smaller we can list in the spring, market's better then anyway. Once she's settled somewhere smaller. They had a plan for where I would live, and I was the last to hear it, because I wasn't meant to hear it at all. I want to tell you what changed in me at that table, because it wasn't rage. I keep waiting, even now, to feel the rage people expect, and it never quite comes. What I felt was the clarifying cold of finally seeing the whole form instead of the line they'd pointed at. The exclusion I'd been filing under kindness for a year wasn't drift. It wasn't my children being busy. It was scheduled. It was minuted. There were timestamps. I had become an item on an agenda, and the agenda had a spring deadline. And there was one word in that thread I couldn't place, a word that has no business in a story about two kids who simply owned their mother's house. Somebody had written, put it in the LLC. I read it twice. An LLC is not a thing you need to own a house you already own. An LLC is a thing you form when you're about to do something with the house. I heard Kevin's boots on the garage steps, and I closed the tablet, and I smiled at him and said the photos were lovely, and I drove home to the back bedroom that used to be his, and I did not sleep. The next morning I did what I did for 30 years. I pulled the record. You don't need a badge to look at a recorded deed, it's public, it always was, that's the whole point of a recorder's office, so that no one can move property in the dark. I sat at the library computer because I no longer trusted the tablet or my own open mail, and I searched the parcel, the house my husband and I bought in 1986. And there it was, filed and stamped and true. The quitclaim I'd signed a year ago, moving the house to Kevin and Lauren, that I knew about. But under it, recorded just 6 weeks ago, was a second transfer. Kevin and Lauren to Halvorson Property Holdings, LLC. I looked up the LLC. Registered agent, Brianne. Members, Kevin and Brianne. Lauren had signed her share over too. My house was now owned by a company my son and his wife controlled, and my daughter had taken a check to step aside. I could even see how small the check was. The transfer listed a consideration, the amount Lauren was paid for her half interest. $40,000. For half of a house that was about to be staged and listed for well over $400,000. My daughter had sold her share of her childhood home, and of me, for $40,000 and the relief of being done with the errand of her mother. I don't know which hurt more that morning, that Kevin had planned it, or that Lauren had been so cheap to buy. She hadn't even held out for a real number. She just wanted out. And stapled to it in the online file, because people who are sure no one is watching get sloppy, was a listing agreement and an invoice from a staging company. For $1,000 to fill my home with furniture that isn't mine so that strangers can imagine their lives in the rooms where I raised my children. There was a date on the showing schedule. Not spring. They'd moved it up. 3 weeks out. There was one more thing on that screen, and only a clerk would have caught it, which is maybe why they never worried I would. The property tax record had changed too. When the house went into the LLC, the homestead exemption came off it, the senior exemption I'd carried on that parcel for years, the one that kept the taxes low because an old woman lived there and called it home. Gone. To the county, nobody's home lived there anymore, it was just inventory now. And I understood, sitting at that library computer, why the spring deadline had jumped to 3 weeks. Without the exemption, the carrying cost had spiked. The house was suddenly expensive to hold empty. They weren't in a hurry because they were cruel. They were in a hurry because their own paperwork had started charging them rent on me. 3 weeks. That's what I had. Not the vague someday I'd been grieving, a date, on a calendar, and I wasn't on the guest list for that either. I drove home and sat in the car in the driveway of the house that was no longer mine, and let myself be frightened for exactly as long as it took the engine to tick cool. Then I made myself remember something. Here's the part one needs you to sit with, because it's the whole hinge of this. When my husband, Ray, was dying, he was not a dramatic man, but he was a careful one. And one afternoon near the end he held my hand and said, "Meg, keep the Cedar account separate. Don't fold it in with the household. And don't sell the Cedar Hollow land, no matter who tells you it's worthless. Keep one thing that's only yours." I thought it was the morphine talking. I said yes to soothe him. And then, because a promise to a dying man is a kind of law, I kept it, and I forgot I'd kept it. The Cedar account. $310,000, his life insurance and a lifetime of small careful deposits, in a bank 2 towns over, in my name alone. And the Cedar Hollow land, 11 acres his own father left him, in my name alone. Neither one had ever been part of the joint finances. Neither one had ever crossed the kitchen table where Kevin sat with his folder. The statements went to an old post office box we'd kept for 30 years. And here is the thing that I still can't decide whether to laugh or weep about. When Brienne helpfully redirected my mail, she redirected the house address. The Cedar statements never came to the house. They still go to that P.O. box, the one my children don't know exists, the one I've quietly kept the little brass key to on my own ring the entire time. They built their whole plan around controlling my mail, and in doing it, they steered themselves right past the one envelope that could undo them. They didn't miss it because they were careless. I want to be fair to them, even now. They missed it because they were certain. And I found the proof of exactly how certain, back in that group chat, the last time I let myself read it. Because I did go back in. Kevin left the tablet a second time, they'd gotten so comfortable, and I scrolled to a stretch I'd been too shaken to reach before. Lauren had asked, months ago, whether they should worry that Mom would look into the paperwork herself. She used to do that for the county. And Brienne answered, "I have it photographed." She wrote, "She doesn't even know how to log in anymore. I do all that for her now. She can barely find her own statements." Relax. She can barely find her own statements. I sat with that a long time. 30 years I stood at a counter and showed grown adults how to log in, how to find the record, how to read the date in the corner that tells you which document is real. And my son's wife had built her whole plan on the certainty that I couldn't find my own. I told you I never quite got angry. That was the closest I came. But it wasn't the hot kind. It was the cold, useful kind, the kind that closes a tablet very gently and says, out loud, to an empty kitchen, "They wrote down the exact door I'm going to walk out through." So I walked out through it. Quietly. On paper. The way Ray would have. I took everything I'd photographed to a lawyer named Delia Osei, 2 counties over, near the Cedar Hollow land, where none of my children had any reason to go. I laid it all out on her desk in order, the way I'd have built a case file, the quitclaim, the LLC transfer, the listing, the staging invoice, the showing date, the group chat. She read it in silence and then she looked at me the way one professional looks at another and said, "You know exactly what you're looking at, don't you?" I said I'd read deeds for 30 years. She said, "Then you already know the account and the land were never theirs to plan around." She was right, and it was cleaner than I'd let myself hope. The Cedar account and the Cedar Hollow land had never been part of any transfer. They were mine, solely, and they always had been. Nothing my children had done touched them, because my children didn't know they were there to be touched. Delia asked me one careful question first. "The account has a payable on death designation on it. Do you know who it names?" I didn't. Ray had set it up years ago and I'd never looked. She pulled it while I sat there, and my stomach dropped, because if he'd named the kids in some tidy estate planning moment, they'd have had a claim after all. But he hadn't. He'd left it blank, never assigned. Blank meant it was mine to decide, that afternoon, with a clear head, not a locked door, but an unmarked one, and the pen to write the name myself. I named the beneficiary I trusted, so the account and the land would pass the way I chose and not the way a quitclaim and an LLC would have swept them, and Delia notarized it. That same afternoon I put my mail back in my own name at the P.O. box, and I signed a short, plain notice, the kind I'd stamped 1,000 times, establishing on the record that I had not consented to the sale of the home as an occupant, so that at the very least the truth of it couldn't happen fully in the dark. No shouting. No raised voices. Just a pen, and 30 years of knowing which line to sign, and a lawyer who nodded once when it was done. There was only one document left to deliver, and it wasn't legal. It was the one that told my children I knew. Kevin came by that Sunday for a signature. The sale needed me to sign a paper acknowledging I'd vacate, one more form to point at. He set it on the kitchen table with the same reasonable voice from a year ago, and he even had the pen ready. I set 2 pages down next to his. The county printout of the LLC transfer. And 1 screenshot, once she's settled somewhere smaller. Face up, where he could read them. I watched my son's face do several things. I want to be honest that it didn't give me pleasure. He tried the first thing, the thing they always try. Mom, we were going to tell you. Then the second thing. It's easier this way, you know it is, that house is too much for you. Then, when neither one moved me, the last thing, the one that told me exactly who'd written the spring deadline message. You gave us the house, Mom. You signed it over. This is what that meant. I didn't argue with him. There was nothing to argue. I asked him one question, the only one that mattered to me. Which one of you, I said, was going to tell me where I'd be living? He didn't have an answer. There wasn't one. Settled somewhere smaller, had never had an address, because they hadn't gotten that far, because the where of my life had been a footnote in a plan about the what of my house. I slid his sale paper back across the table, and signed. Then I picked up my keys, and for the first time in a year, they were keys to a door 2 counties away that only opened for me. Brianne called me herself, 3 days later, with a warmth in her voice I hadn't heard aimed at me in a very long time. She wanted to talk as family. She was worried I'd gotten confused, that someone out there might take advantage of me, that I shouldn't sign important things without letting them help. She was good at it. If I hadn't already read the words she'd typed, she can barely find her own statements, I might have believed she cared. Instead I heard the plan underneath the concern, the way you hear a second voice in a bad recording. I told her I'd never been less confused in my life, and that the next document she'd hear about from me would come from a lawyer. Then I said goodbye, kindly, and hung up before she could find the next reasonable sentence. It was the first phone call in a year that I got to end. I won't tell you it was clean after that, because truth has a cost and I'd be lying if I pretended otherwise. Lauren stopped speaking to me entirely. In her version, I'm the one who broke the family, and she sent a message I won't repeat that used the grandchildren as a door she could close in my face. The house sold in April, to a nice young couple. Some evenings I think about that kitchen where I signed away more than a deed, and I let myself grieve it. It was 30 years, and generosity that gets used is still generosity. But I set up the small place near Cedar Hollow, a 2-bedroom with a porch that faces Ray's 11 acres, and I filled out my own forwarding form in my own handwriting, and my mail comes now to a box with my name on it that no one opens but me. I walk the land most mornings, scrub oak and an old stone wall and a view Ray's father must have loved for reasons he never explained. I had a surveyor out, not to sell it, but to know it, to have the corners marked and the map in a drawer that's mine. Some days I think I'll build something small at the top of the rise, with a real spare room, so that if a grandchild ever wants to know me instead of my house, there'll be a bed for them. And some days I just stand in the grass and let it be enough that no one can point at a line and tell me to sign it. Kevin has called 4 times. The most recent voicemail said, "Mom, call me back, we need to talk about the account." Because of course, eventually, they found the shape of the thing they'd missed. You can't keep $300,000 invisible forever once someone goes looking. For the first time in a long while, I have something they want. I haven't called back. I'm not punishing him. I just don't have anything to say that a paper trail hasn't already said. Peace, I've learned, doesn't require reconciliation. I used to think those were the same thing. They aren't. You can be at peace with people you no longer sit at the table with. You can forgive the certainty that you were helpless and still never hand anyone the chance to prove it again. The new key sticks a little in the cold. Every morning I stand on my own porch and work it loose, and it gives, and the door opens. It's the first door in 4 years that only opens for me. So let me ask you something, because I've turned it over 100 times and I still don't think there's a clean answer. If your children stopped calling the day the house was finally theirs, if being useful was the only love left on the line, would you have said something out loud? Or would you have done what I did, and quietly kept one door of your own? I don't think there's a wrong answer to that. I think there's only your answer, and whatever it cost you to learn it. Tell me in the comments, I read them, and I'd like to hear yours. And if this story found something true for you, subscribe to Broken Bonds, and I'll see you at the next one.